All right, I think let's go ahead and make a start of it. We may have some folks join us here in a moment for this last session in this unit of study. If you've read through the reading beforehand, you'll know there's a lot to cover. So why don't we start with a short prayer and then we'll kind of jump right into it. God, we give you thanks for this, for the word that you provided to us in our study of Genesis this morning. And so we invite you into our time together to open our hearts and minds to the words and the teachings that you have for each one of us. Guide our conversations and bless our time together. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Amen. Right, so had a week off, so just to make sure we're all in the same boat. We're picking up right where we left off the last time. Abraham's had 3 visitors who've come by the tent. And, well, yeah, angels or, yeah, who knows? It varies by the verse, yeah. They have made a prophecy of Sarah being pregnant in a year's time. Sarah laughs and gets busted, and that's sort of where that narrative ends. So we'll pick up today in the middle of chapter 18. Now, what I've done, given the amount of stuff in these few chapters, is I've picked out 5 scenes or stories that I made some notes on, but I know in doing that I've left out other stuff. So if we get to some of that other stuff and I haven't brought it up and you want to talk about it, just give me a wave, and happy to talk about it, not leaving it out for any other reason than just we want to go home before Thursday. So and before I do that, I mentioned the last time, I think, that I would bring this. This is a Jewish Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and it's in Hebrew and English. So I'll pass it around, but you'll notice that the title is on the back, and that the presentation page is in the back, and that Genesis is in the back and works its way forward. So I'll pass it along. You're welcome to take a look at it if you would like. It came up in conversation last time.
How's the translation? Is it their translation?
It's the JPS, the Jewish Publication Service translation.
It's quite a different.
It'll differ a little bit.
Yeah,
but it's pretty close.
It's not like the authorised version. It's not an old ancient.
No. It's a modern translation. Yeah.
I'll go with this.
All right. So chapter 18, verse 16. So we've just had the scene with the visitors at the tent, and so they're moving on now, and Abraham walks with them. You can kind of envision that as they're leaving the immediate area, his area. And it starts off really interesting, I think, with this internal monologue that God has with himself, questioning whether or not he should let Abraham in on what the plans are for Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, if you remember, when Abraham and Lot kind of split up because their holdings are getting too big to manage together, Lot chooses to go down into the valley that looks like Eden, and Abraham stays up in the hills. And so Lot is living in the town of Sodom. So that's the area that God is thinking about destroying because God's heard bad things are going on there. Which is just, again, an interesting way to, kind of think about God and his relationship to what's going on. And how does Abraham respond to that? To the plans that God finally decides to tell him about?
So to pleads with him,
Haggles with
doesn't
him.
he?
Yeah,
Negotiates.
yes, negotiates, he haggles, he bargains with God.
In fact, it's like them being in the marketplace, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's interesting when you think about this conversation with the previous interactions between God and Abraham, when Abraham tends to, I think in the previous instance that he knows he's talking to God, he
Just doesn't
drops to the ground and he doesn't say anything, and God does all the talking, and so now all of a sudden Abraham says, well, wait a minute. And it seems to work. He seems to change God's mind about things. No? You don't think so?
Yes,
Okay.
It's really amusing.
It is.
You can imagine it's a Jewish joke, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it could be. One of the things I read in the commentaries is you'll notice Abraham keeps talking down what the threshold is for how many righteous people, and he stops at 10. And so you might think, well, why doesn't he go to 1, and so a couple of the commentaries dealt with it differently. One thought that probably meant that he figured that was as good a bargain as he was gonna get. The other one talked about that 10 was and I don't know exactly what this means, but 10 was the minimal administrative unit for a communal organization in later Israelite life. So, 10 would have been,
Yes.
10 would, it would have been an important threshold, especially again, as we talk about people who are collecting these stories and kind of projecting some of their practices and understandings back into these more ancient stories. It also means that Lot's family numbers less than what the requisite is. So that's why Lot's family has to be evacuated, because there's not enough of them to call off the impending destruction. Right. So this will move in then to the Sodom and Gomorrah story in chapter 19. What is this story about? What do we take from
I
it?
was saying to Ruth, does this sound like the flowers? Is some sort of recollection of an earthquake or a volcanic event?
Okay,
And they're trying to explain it.
okay.
And the only way they can explain it is God was angry and these people were very naughty.
Yeah,
It's in extremes, isn't it? They're not just bad people, it's what they do,
Yeah.
what they said they do.
yeah, okay.
But presumably that was a way that enemies treated their prisoners and things like that. The ultimate humiliation sort of.
Okay,
Who knows?
What else?
But it's come through history, just the name of it.
well, that's it, yeah, it's a very enduring story. It's referenced numerous other times in the Bible. Other prophets talk about it. It's mentioned in the New Testament. So it's obviously a story that held a lot of resonance in Jewish tradition.
Gomorrah is only mentioned, they say Sodom and Gomorrah, but Gomorrah's not mentioned that.
No, it's just kind of in the wrong place. Yeah. Well, so there's a couple things about this passage, more more recently, well, probably not just recently, but this is one of those clobber passages that often get raised when there are debates about the church's relationship with LGBTQ people and how the church relates to them and how they relate to the church, and if that's a compatibility situation. People who would argue against same-sex marriage, this would be one of those passages that they would cite and say, well, the Bible says this. So it's before we talk about the nuts and bolts of the story, it's interesting to think about. It's very easy to look at the request of the men in the village of the two visitors to Lot's house and what they want to do, and the sexual sin that is related to that action, and make that's the sin of Sodom. That's why they were annihilated. But it's interesting because at other points in the Bible, when this story is mentioned, there are other reasons that are given as the sin of Sodom. At different times, it's mentioned that it's the neglect of the poor, it's the lies that they tell, has to do with greed and luxurious living, heterosexual abuse, and most often inhospitability to strangers. So I remember when I was in seminary, we were studying this, and the professor's like, this is a story about hospitality, and they fail to offer hospitality. That's an important Jewish quality, and that is the sin.
Was everyone convinced?
Well, I'm not sure. I think it's hard to look at this narrative explicitly and immediately draw that. I mean, there's aspects of it, yes, but it's difficult, and so I think
The thing that I found really difficult with this story wasn't what the visitors wanted to do to the men, but what Lot was prepared to do with his daughters.
Yes.
That they were expendable, that they could be
Yes.
gang raped by all the men out there, and that sorted it all out. I just found that's what
Yes.
me more than anything else. Actually.
Yeah. It's not a nice story
No.
in really any sense of it.
Well, they felt they had to include it. It never got rubbed out at any point.
Well, so there's a couple of ways to look at this and compare it to, again, what we're starting to see certain motifs or general storylines that get sort of repeated. We'll see that in a little bit with Abraham and Sarah and trading her off as a sister again. We've already seen that story once. We'll see it again. So think about. So John, you mentioned perhaps it was an explanation of some sort of natural disaster. So think about this story and compare it to the flood story that we talked about a couple weeks ago. Both stories, there is an obvious problem with sexual wickedness. So the flood story started, remember, with the sons of God had come down and were intermarrying with humans, and God had enough of that. Then obviously there's a variety of sexual issues in the Sodom and Gomorrah story. There is some form of disaster, so obviously the flood takes place. If you think back to the story a few weeks ago, that battle of the 9 kings or whatever it was, so some of the details in that story talked about, like, there were tar pits or oil pits in that area, so this is the same area. And even today there's a lot of petroleum-esque stuff in that, where most people think these towns would have been located. And so it's quite possible that there was some sort of, disaster or eruption or something like that, that this may be representing. The outcome of the story is a remnant is saved. Those that were found righteous were saved. And then there's the story afterwards about the patriarch being drunk and being violated in some way by his children. So that is kind of interesting to think about it that way. Is it some sort of retelling?
But Abraham's not involved in this.
No.
Well, only at the sidelines.
Well,
Because
yeah.
he saved Lot, but Lot wasn't going to become the father of or not the nation that God wanted to be.
Well, yeah. Well, so I think that, I mean, it does raise a lot of questions, I would say. We can also compare part of it to the previous chapter, at the beginning of chapter 18, the three visitors come to Abraham. He offers them kind of the same offer that Lot makes. Oh, stay here and rest and so forth. In Abraham's story, Abraham goes out and gets the prize calf and tells Sarah to make the bread out of the finest flour, whatever. So in this story, Lot makes unleavened bread and gives it to, so it's kind of like, it's hospitality. I don't know what, I don't really know what to make of that. If it's some sort of, well, Lot didn't go all out, maybe he didn't have the resources that Abraham had, I don't know.
The unleavened bread is not to do with him having to get out quickly later.
No,
As in
well,
Passover.
Yeah, I don't think so, but, Lot assumes that the visitors would be leaving very early in the morning. So does he know that or does he think that because he knows there'd be trouble with them in town? I mean, is it that bad of a place that he just knows, it's not where you want to stick around? He is concerned about them staying in the square in the town. But then his reaction to when they say, look, get out. Oh, well, the other thing that when the three visitors come to Abraham, they ask where Sarah is. They ask where other family members are. And they do the same to Lot. Where is your wife and your children? Get ready to leave because you need to get out. So how does Lot respond to that? What does he do or not do? He's really kind of wishy-washy about the whole thing, isn't he?
He doesn't want to fall out with the rest of the town.
Well, it says that his sons-in-law laugh at him. So there's the laughter from the other story, if you want to draw all the parallels. You kind of get the impression that Lot's like, yeah, we probably should leave, but I don't know, and I really don't want, it's a lot of work, and that type of thing. Because it feels like they have to really, push him out to get them to leave.
It says they dragged him out, didn't it?
Yeah.
No, we led him to safety.
Yeah.
And then he didn't want to flee to the mountains,
Yeah.
Oh, it's too much.
Yeah.
It's another one of these little bartering things, isn't it?
Yeah.
He goes something easier.
Yeah, so maybe God's thinking, well,
Do you think Lot probably quite liked it in there? Good. It
Well-
was a good time, place, like Nineveh and all that.
well, it's interesting because it talks then later about, he says, well, I want to go to this town. I don't want to live in the hills because I'm a city boy and I'm not going to make it. So I want to go to this town. And so it seems like towns called Zor, and it seems like that Zor probably was included in the initial demolition plans. And they say, okay, we'll protect Zor, but you need to go to Zor. And then next thing you know, Zor didn't really work out, so they're up in the caves. Let's see. Trying to go through, I got out of order on my notes here, let's see. Okay, so they get out. Abraham watches from the hills, or sees the remnants of what's happened. Which almost sounds like a script, like you could see that in the movie, right? He's standing on the edge, looking down over the valley, and sees that. So then we get on to this great scene with Lot and his daughters. This is chapter 19, verses 30 to 38. What do you want to say about that?
Most dreadful part of the story.
Yeah.
I'm concerned, you got my head around it.
What?
Having two daughters of my own, I can't.
Yeah. Well, Chris, going back to what you mentioned earlier about his offer of his daughters to the gang, he's offered them as sort of passive victims of sexual abuse. Now in this story, he kind of becomes a passive victim or whatever of sexual abuse. And so his fate directly corresponds to his sin. And I don't know if that's something we've seen directly throughout the other stories we've read, but it's just interesting to see how that turns on itself. I think it's odd that the daughters are convinced that they're alone. I mean, they would have known that the city where they lived had been destroyed, but they've been to this other community of Zor, and for whatever reason they didn't stay, but they were there. They saw other people following this, destruction. So now they're living up in the caves, and they've decided that the only hope for humanity is if they can have children.
But eventually that backfired, wouldn't it? Because it wouldn't, if you have sex with your own children, that's going to have repercussions in the development.
Well, that's it, yeah. So it's just, it's just an odd story. Now, at the very end, I think maybe part of the reasoning for it is in the justification that the offspring of this episode are the Moabites and the Amorites. And so, like we've seen with other groups that the Israelites didn't get along with, that's a good reason to say, well, the Moabites, look what they came from. We can't,
It's a contrast. This is all about where the Jewish nation has come from, where the Israelites have come from.
Yeah.
At the same time, they're doing down everyone else that they don't get on with.
Yeah. So and if you think about it, that was a similar thing that happened in, the drunken episode with Noah, is the curse of Canaan comes out of that. And so that identifies an enemy group or a contrary group to the Israelites, an outside group. So then what's really, I think, kind of interesting is, you look at this story in isolation. So this is the origin story for the Moabites and the Amorites. Who's the most famous Moabite?
Ruth.
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 Yeah, So,
Sorry,
so you think about that story, and, here it's sort of a story of exclusion, and the book of Ruth is really about sort of integration, and then in the New Testament, she winds up listed as, in the lineage of Jesus. So, it's just interesting to see kind of how that thread weaves through the narrative of the Bible.
I just feel that all this goes from 18:6 to the end of this chapter where we just read. It's almost like a little sub-story. If you cut that out and just carried on at chapter, whatever it was, chapter 22, you still get the same, the narrative.
Yeah,
It's all like
well,
this.
and it, and we've talked
It's all
before.
like in the operas where they put another little opera in the interval.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and, we've talked before about the different sort of voices or traditions that are editing and compiling this, and several of these stories, and you can almost hear it in the way that they're told, and the narrative and so forth. They're switching back and forth, and they all have different concerns for what the story means to them and what they want the story to mean for others who read it.
I think it's interesting that the daughters aren't named, and neither is Lot's wife, and she became a pillar of salt. Now, how did that happen? Pillar of salt. What does that mean?
Well,
There's going to be some rock out there that looks like a woman.
Well, then-
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
just like you get in the
Anyway,
funny things in Arizona and all that.
yes, yeah, and
How did that become that shape?
that seems pretty universal explanation, is that there are those salt formations. This is near the Dead Sea,
She got salted.
which, and so there are these sort of pillars of salt that you can go online and find pictures that, with a little imagination, look somewhat human in shape, but they're just these tall pillars, and so I think that's, again, trying to explain why things are the way they are. Well, she turned around and,
Wasn't told not to, was it?
no,
Yes, they were.
Well, they were told, yeah.
Oh, were they told?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I missed
Yeah.
that bit then. I didn't
Yeah.
see that.
Does say that.
Because I always
Back.
thought that, and then I thought, so there, but it must have said earlier on, and then I missed it.
yeah, it does,
It does mention that somewhere, doesn't it?
Anyway, don't worry, I'll believe you. Don't look back, yes.
Yeah.
Here it is,
Yep.
verse 17.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so, anything else on Sodom and Gomorrah or Lot and his daughters? Are we ready to move on to a much less sexually ambiguous story, because there's
let's
another
do
one
it,
coming?
actually.
There's plenty more to come.
Yeah. So we get to chapter 20. And this is the story of Abraham and Sarah and Abimelech. And as you were saying, the stories appear kind of out of nowhere. So there's no reason why they're traveling. We're still assuming that there's no sense of timeline, but Sarah's supposed to be giving birth within a year of this last story. But they're traveling, and in some ways, it feels like a bit of a repeat of the story of when they went to Egypt. Abraham passes Sarah off as his sister. She is taken notice of and brought into the, I would assume, harem, or, you know, whatever the situation was, with Abimelech. But this story is different from the Egypt story. What stood out? What stood out in this story to you?
It stood out that Abraham said, she's actually my sister anyway, well, my half-sister.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Throwing that in the mix.
And God appears to Amalek.
Yeah.
Amalek gets a message.
Yeah.
This has been between Abraham and God, no? Or the chosen people, anyway. This is a definite foreigner, isn't it?
yes, yeah,
A bit like the Magi in the Matthew.
yeah. But that conversation that God has with Abimelech, I think is also really interesting, because it kind of comes out of the gate, I'm gonna kill you and kill everybody because you're, you know, you've taken this other man's wife, and Abimelech's like, I didn't know who she was, I haven't touched her, you know. And then God says, that's right, you didn't know who she was, and I made sure you didn't touch her, and so you're okay. And that just seemed, it's just kind of an interesting, I don't know, moves from that accusatory nature to a very much affirming Abimelech's, let me find that.
Well, he said he was the king of Gerar, so I suppose he probably thought, well, I'll get away with anything.
Well, yeah. I mean, certainly he had power. He had money. I didn't look up Gerar. I don't know how big of an area it was, but here in verse 3, but God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, you are as good as dead, because the woman you've taken, bless you, she is a married woman. Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, she is my sister? And didn't she also say, he is my brother? I've done this with a clear conscience and clean hands. Bless you. And then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I've kept you from sinning against me. That's why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he's a prophet. So, yeah, and in the meantime then, Abraham says, well, she really is my sister. Which, you know, which is interesting. At the time, and they're half brother and sister, and from what I've read, at the time that would not necessarily have been especially taboo. Although, by the time you get to the book of Deuteronomy, then it's specifically, you know, outlawed. So then Abraham gets rich again out of this whole deal. Abimelech apparently is trying to appease God to not change his mind about things, and gives him livestock and money.
Abraham always ends out top on all these things.
He comes out really well, yeah.
I just wonder what he did with all his stuff that he was given before.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
where's it all gone?
High living.
Yeah.
But really, he's running a scam, isn't he?
Well, I mean, it feels like that, doesn't
This
it?
is my sister. Oh no, settle out of court, get all this done, and go on to the next king.
It is an interesting pattern. Not one you would think would be some sort of morality that you want to teach
Yeah.
You
I'm
know,
not
this
sure
is the
we
way
should
to
promote
really
it. He's the
get rich.
father of the nation, you know.
Yeah.
Should
Yeah.
he be above
How did you
such
get all your wealth? Well, well done.
I think the very last, the last two verses, 17 and 18 here, are interesting. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female slaves, so they could have children again, for the Lord had kept all the women in Abimelech's household from conceiving because of Abraham's wife, Sarah.
Strange, it's just mentioned at the end, not.
Yes, yeah.
It's not the right part of the narrative.
Yeah.
You need to know that to understand what was going on earlier.
Yeah, yeah. So several of the commentaries have suggested that Abimelech perhaps was impotent, and that was God's way of preventing anything untoward from happening. Who knows? But yeah, that piece of information and the piece of information about Abraham and Sarah being brother and sister would be helpful things to know a little bit earlier in the story. Yeah. But again, that chapter, that episode there, just kind of feels like maybe it came from somewhere else and wound up.
Is it not, it's so similar to that, well, not similar to that business in Egypt. Is it the same story that's been passed down already, where it's got, at some time in the telling, it's got split into two, with two separate sorts of outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, it could be.
Of course, you don't know if any of this stuff is in the right order anyway. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
other than the fact that you go by, you know, Abraham is the one who's getting older all the way through.
Yes, yeah.
And other people presumably dying off. I mean, he must have had lots of grandchildren, and if he's going on at that age.
Well, that's it, it's just,
his own family.
yeah. Well, and again, I mean, it's hard to track and it's hard to know. You know, I mean, we talked about the story in Egypt. What we figured, Sarah was in her late 60s supposedly at that time. So this is, if it follows chronologically, at least like 15 or 20 years later, because we've already had that time jump. And then we're coming right back into the story where, you know, Ishmael is grown. So, I mean, she'd been in her 70s or 80s, and he's older than she is, right? So, yeah, it's just interesting to, see how those stories go. All right.
At what point in the Bible does people start living a sort of what we consider a normal lifespan? Moses went into beyond 100,
Yeah, yeah. It'll
once
happen
Once they
eventually.
settled in the promised land, all that returned to normal. Once they weren't wandering around.
It would seem to be, yeah, yeah, it would seem to be. Okay, so after that story then suddenly the Lord was gracious to Sarah, and the Lord did for Sarah what he promised. And she gave birth, became pregnant, and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. So I haven't, in my notes, I haven't gone into a lot of detail on this section here, but essentially it's Hagar and Ishmael get kicked out. And God looks on them and protects them and sees them through. Abimelech makes another appearance. I don't think he trusts Abraham. He's very cautious in dealing with Abraham. And then, so skimming through that, we get to chapter 22, which I think is the bigger story of the two. And that is the binding of Isaac. So, I mean, I'm assuming this story is, everybody is familiar with this story. What do we think about the story? Do you like the story? What does it teach us? What do we take away from it?
Trust in the Lord, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. What does it tell us about God? Or what don't we like about the story?
It's a great Sunday school story, isn't it? It's, because it's got a happy ending for the children.
Well,
Does it suggest that maybe God wants reassurance that he's chosen the right guy?
Well,
God's having is this the right one? Should I get rid of him and start again?
it's very explicit that God is testing Abraham. Now we're 22 chapters into this now, and Abraham's been on the scene for the last, 10 or 12 of them. And, how many times has, I think we were talking last time about these recurring episodes of God blesses Abraham and tells him all this stuff's gonna happen. And then time passes. And then God blesses Abraham and tells him all this stuff's gonna happen. And time passes, and Abraham would seem, I don't know that God told him to go see Abimelech necessarily, but Abraham would seem to pretty much toes the line with what God has asked him to do. So is that troubling that he still wants to test Abraham?
We're trying to put a human nature onto God, aren't we? That as if he's,
Well,
not,
yeah.
not certain.
Yeah,
Perhaps that's what the people who wrote this down
Yeah.
felt as well.
yeah,
But it was the ultimate test. After all this business about you're going to have a son and it's
Yeah.
you're going to have a complete nation out of this, and the sands and the stars and all that, and there he is willing to cut that
Yeah.
literally off.
yeah. So there were a couple things that I picked up out of some of the commentaries that I'll share. First would just be a reminder that the expectation of the Israelite nation would be that God has the right to the firstborn. So that extends to, first fruits and all that, but, you would dedicate your first, probably especially son, to God. So what's depicted here in this story would be understood as a specifically religious act, an act of faith, giving to God the thing that Abraham loves, because only then would it be a true sacrifice. So that's the idea. The hope was that God would provide, this is projecting into the way Abraham may have thought about it. The hope would be that God would provide Isaac or another life back in redemption for the sacrifice. So if you think about that way of thinking, and you connect it with sort of the substitutionary atonement theory of the cross and Jesus, that Jesus is an atonement, is a sacrifice of something we love, and that our life then is offered back in redemption. I think that would be how that.
Well, that's how we see it as Christians, but.
Well, that's it, yes,
How
yeah.
the Jews view this.
Well, I mean, that would be it, that they, I think that's the idea, is that, and that's why the sacrifice didn't actually take place. Well, I mean, there was a sacrifice, but it wasn't Isaac. Is that, that was the redemption. That the sacrifice was made because Abraham was willing to do it. And that was, yeah, that was the sacrifice. If you could convince yourself that you would be willing to do that to your child, then you don't need to do it because you've already done it. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
Also, there's always been a passage in Britain's War Requiem
Uh-huh.
where he uses a Wilfred Owen poem which has this story,
Okay.
but Abraham is sacrificed. He says, but he picked up the knife, and he says, and all the seed of Europe one by one afterwards. It's
Oh,
a comment on the Great War.
yeah,
But it's put in the Mass at the time where it mentions Abraham and his seed forever in the
Okay.
Mass. And it uses all this language, and you think it's just the story of them going up the mountain,
Mhm.
where the boy says, where's the sacrifice? I mean, obviously the lad's a little bit concerned.
Yeah.
But maybe they're not going to be able to do the sacrifice because there isn't anything to offer.
yeah, yeah,
And
that's
it's
right,
this word God will provide, which ends up as the name of place, doesn't it?
yeah. So the other thing to note in the language in this is the repetition of the word see, S-E-E. It's repeated at least 5 times in this story, and it talks about, Isaac says, where's the sacrifice? No, that's not what I wrote. I guess it depends on your translation. I was looking at a different translation yesterday, but anyway, it talks about, Abraham looked up and there was the ram. Abraham, in verse 4, on the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance.
And he got
Wait a
very
minute.
well. He didn't want any witnesses, did he? He just
Well, no, yeah, he only went by himself. But the idea is that as he gets closer to the event, his seeing, his vision becomes progressively clearer. His trust in God becomes more defined, and that enables him to see the ram in the thicket, and I think, and God says, well, in some translations, God sees that Abraham, followed his commands and gives a blessing. It's a tricky passage, for sure. One of the things to note is, it says it takes place on Mount Moriah, and that's traditionally thought to be the mount in Jerusalem. So it ties into all the other stuff that takes place on that
is that why
mountain.
Muslims venerate it as well? Then?
Mhm.
Is that one is venerated by Muslims? The Mount in Jerusalem, because of Abraham's actions there?
Well, I think they generally venerate it because that's where Muhammad ascended.
Oh, yes.
into
the same place. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, they do recognize a lot of the biblical
They recognize
stories.
the story, don't they?
Yeah. Let's see, so here, I just had, and we may have already answered these, but let me see, I got some questions here. So does God really know how Abraham would respond? What is the nature of God in this story? It's hard to think about other places. it's not uncommon, I think, to see people claim that God is testing them in other places in the Bible. And we have the book of Job where that's explicitly, you know, more a wager almost than a test. But certainly this is the big one.
Abraham doesn't argue with this time, does he? He doesn't say,
No.
like he did with the number of people that's going to be in Sodom.
Yeah, no, he doesn't really say,
You say, well,
so
why
much
can't I
reason.
take someone else, you know, if you want to give her a sacrifice?
so in this story,
Must have thought.
do you think God is made vulnerable? Because what we know from the story so far is God has chosen Abraham through Isaac to be this great nation. And so this great gift of Isaac has finally come. So what happens if Abraham doesn't understand what's going on and carries through with the, I mean, we won't know, but
Oh, God, we'd have to start all over again.
Yeah, find
Go
out.
back to chapter
Find
1.
another
yeah,
Somebody else.
yeah. So it's just,
Abraham could have decided not to take Isaac there and not to do it, couldn't he?
well, yeah, he could have,
Yeah,
yeah,
because I mean, it's a huge thing to agree to do, isn't it?
that's right. So, yeah, what would that do to,
Yeah,
yeah, so I think it goes back to, so you can get lost in the loops in this, but, so if God knows that Abraham is gonna do this and do it the right way, and that there's not risk,
What's he worried about?
why does he do it in the first place?
yeah,
And if God doesn't know what Abraham will do, and there's the risk that Isaac could be killed in it,
he's lost it as good.
yeah. Yeah. So obviously none of that happens, but it just is another characterization of God in a slightly different light than we've seen. You know, I mean, think back to the Sodom and Gomorrah story. God knows what's gonna happen. And I mean, he gets talked down a little bit from his initial plan, but I mean, it's very much, you know, the angels or whatever going to Lot's house and they're like, you know, get out because we're doing this. I mean, it's, you know, and then here it's, I don't know, it's a little more, well, it's just an introspective story, I think, that really kind of pushes us to think about that.
It's strong stuff. It's one of the,
Yeah,
after Adam and Eve, it's probably the next big, and the flood.
Yeah,
The next big
yeah.
focus, isn't it?
yeah. And at the end, Abraham praises God as a provider for his own test. Just kind of a, and then at the very end, they go home. But it doesn't say that Isaac went with him.
And Abraham returned to his servants.
No. So you kind of wonder where Isaac was in his head.
Yeah,
After that-
Did you really think you were going to do that?
Yeah, and if he got home and told Sarah about it, what do you think she had to say?
Yeah,
You know, I mean, very quickly, you can see the heading of chapter 23 is the death of Sarah, so very quickly, we're moving on from, you know, it's becoming Isaac's story.
Well, everything that she to do with her.
Well, she's done
it.
Yeah, yeah. But, I mean, it doesn't really, I mean, you think about the turmoil in that family that was caused by Hagar and Ishmael, in that situation, and we've seen that twice. Again, we don't have anything to base this on, but I think it's interesting to think about what the emotional fallout from that episode would be when they all got back home. You would, I don't know, you would think the relationship would be different. But then this is also 3,000 years ago when people had different sorts of relationships than we do now. So anyway, just something to think about. And again, it's interesting, you mentioned it's a good Sunday school story because it has a good ending. But you think about, you know, we teach the flood, we teach the binding of Isaac. I mean,
They missed out all the good books for,
well,
for the Sunday school.
you didn't have a lesson on Sodom and Gomorrah, or
We all heard of it, but it was never talked about.
yeah.
They're all a bit adjusted, weren't they? 'Cause
Yeah.
About Samuel being called in the temple, he never explained at that time about what's up with Eli and his family.
Yeah. So, anyway, I hope that was,
Yeah.
Well done, 'cause it goes on, isn't
Yeah,
it?
good effort, Brian.
well, so we will see. I think now that we're this far in, we've got to go all the way, right? So, I don't know that we'll be able to have a study during Advent, because I'm gonna be gone quite a bit at the end of November, and that's gonna make it difficult, but, when we reconvene, we'll pick up and, soldier on. There's still some interesting, stories to come. So I've got some music, and, let me ask, did anybody go online and listen to the song from the last time? No? Oh, good. Well, I'll use that one again. Because the alternative was a Joan Baez song about Abraham and Isaac, but it's not terrible, but I like this one, so. These are just the. Look it up here, just a moment.
Pick it up.
Okay,
Step
thank
coach.
you.
Oh, no, he uses high quality paper, I was trying to say.
It's just what I get on Amazon, that's it. Let's see.
Here we go.
I was trying to-
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, please watch the work.
Okay, this is Tango with God. It's a more contemporary piece, and it's performed by Cantus, which is a male ensemble.